What's the American Airlines one called? Or something?
You know what? Maybe that's because it wasn't a generations on cleanness makes work because it because people doesn't but was passing along.
Oh,
You have to speak.
yeah, right.
Because you're actually like doesn't implement it.
It'll show up.
It's like something
This probably doesn't have the agencies.
oh, it's generic. It's not just
I was just saying,
well, actually, yes, because then they will also receive English tests.
I guess just
this method is implemented so that Horizon is happy. Return nothing.
And the reason why people get agents received is because this is class that is mixed into which claims and support. So you can't have support, support for some every points, but not others.
So that is a good issue. No. Well, they don't.
If they don't claim native support, they should claim.
They don't complain. Yeah, they don't. I think it's actual computer apply or not.
Ground means that for some entry points, support,
I can't now.
don't have support for any figure.
I'll check it.
And to make it work, we change what it means to modify all links and to define any entry points to receive those additional arguments and do something with that. Maybe it's quite easy because the collection receives them already. So you just pass them here. Something that breaks something for the client.
Which one is it? This. Dog.
So I was discussing this whole region. So if you set through then it starts failing really fast and because some of these ones they belong to them support are not ready for that. Because once you enable it there, and if it's same, then all endpoints get additional arguments like limit and integration first. And for example, get agents that comes from Azure DBX and should be easy to make it support, but I'm thinking whether there's any complications whether this change is that safe or someone.
Well, I guess now would be the time to do it. It's early on in the cycle.
In a way, it's bottleneck in ML2. Claims made it to work doesn't support it for some.
Yeah, well, it's a bug in the mix.
So you can't sort actions.
Yeah.
And maybe something else.
I looked yep. Color.
Because I see
the
scheduler, external networks fail, POS fail.
So, should we go?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
I was going to say this. Do you want to introduce or?
Yeah, so the next session is going to be the Neutron interconnector, and we have the expert here.
Yeah.
So, actually, in the summer, in the agenda we had the VPN and Neutron interconnection, and I think it's better to talk about VPN first, because this is one of the possible ingredients for the Neutron interconnection.
Okay.
Networking VPN has been started a while ago, I won't make the history of it, but perhaps I will make a quick remember of what the service provides, because I'm not sure everyone is so familiar. So we hadn't much feature landed in the past cycles. We had a bunch of refactoring done on the reference implementation, but no new feature. But for Queens, we are targeting to launch a few API extensions. So one consists in having the ability to have the flexibility to define routes that corresponds to IP prefixes that are behind certain ports. So this is a port routes extension, and it's been pushed to Neutron Lib in July or June, but we withdrew the documentation because we had no implementation. And now the target for Queens is to land the implementation. The other feature that we want to land is the ability to define the data plane identifier for VXLAN when we use VXLAN with EVPN to create layer 2 connectivity with HPVPN. For now, we just let it free to the backend to use the identifier it wants to use, which is supported by the BGP EVPN specifications. But some hardware platforms require defining the DNI, so this is something that we will add. These are the two key things that we will plan for Queens.
Okay.
So this is really for the networking BGP EVPN framework. For historical reasons, the reference driver is not sitting in this project, but in networking backlight, because the networking driver is designed to be working with Neutron OVS and Neutron line of bridge. But we introduced another component, lightweight implementation of BGP VPNs to make this possible. And this lightweight implementation has been sitting in another repository because it's useful for this BGP VPN driver, but it's also an ingredient for other drivers for other services. So to land the implementation for new features, we need to also land the implementation in networking backend.
Okay.
And for this to be global in a viable way, we had some refactoring to do for the RPCs. So one of the PCs that we are trying to land, wanted to land in September, which would perhaps be October, was the refactoring of the RPCs to use push-pull OVO-based RPCs.
Okay.
This is what I was mentioning yesterday. The other piece that we have in the pipe is an improvement of the test coverage. I've been working on it's pretty much complete. I mean, you can always add tests, but we have working in a full stack environment with a big addition in the last cycle. And we also have been improving the different variety of scenario that we are covering with template scenario. So we are getting at the stage where we cover an interesting set of scenarios. So the other thing is that we only have a partial coverage of OVS and line of bridge. So the layer 2 connectivity with EVPN is only supported with line of bridge, and IPVPN connectivity only with was initially only supported with OVS, but is also supported with line of bridge. So we are still missing one of the cells in the table, which is support of EVPN with open switch.
The layer 2.
Yeah, layer 2 connectivity with EVPN with open switch. And I don't know yet if we will be able to end this for quiz, but it would be nice to have the complete matrix. Another thing that we have been discussing yesterday was the perspective of perhaps having a driver in OVN. So I don't know if you want to say a word.
Well, we've been talking about how it works today with the multi-OVS and then what our integration points could be for OVN. That's what all this is, actually. So we came up with a few options that we need to explore to see which one makes most sense. But the first one we're going to explore was reusing as much of a bagpipe as possible and see how close we can get to reusing as much as possible. If not, then it'd be more work.
So bagpipe is all the logic for the BGP speaker stuff, right?
Yes, it's reusing XBTP as a library to actually produce and decode BGP messages.
Yeah.
But it has its own engine to use the routes, interpret them, and put them in the right VPN instances. And it has its own pluggable data plane so that we can have drivers for OVS, Linux, Linux Bridge, or Linux routing.
Part of it we were talking about yesterday is bagpipe BGP also, it programs its own bridge, and then there's like
patchport to
some
area.
patchport to the integration bridge that gets packets to and from it to where it makes sense. And we're going to go and see if it would make sense.
So the stuff that happens on the bridge is pushing on labels or VNIs, that kind of stuff, to match the appropriate whatever is coming from.
Yeah, based on the route that were advertised by other routers or computers.
Okay. How does it do that how does the Linux bridge implementation work?
So Linux has had in the vanilla kernel stack an MPLS implementation for a while now. It's usable for this application since 4.2 or something like 4.4. So we use something which is a bit lighter than networking spaces for isolation, which is called the Verve interfaces. That provide just the level of isolation needed for IP routing. So in this table, you have IP routes that, as an action, have an imposition of an MPLS label. And we create these mappings with the calls done with try route 2. So,
and does this happen just where the L3 agent sits, or down on the compute node directly?
It's completely distributed on all compute nodes. There's no network node involved.
Okay.
It's something that I didn't mention. We could do a full explanation of the architecture of the project. So.
Oh, that's okay.
But yes, it is completely distributed.
Actually, to step back for a second, when you mentioned, Neutron interconnect. So from a functional standpoint, the use case is two separate tenant networks sitting in two separate.
Do you want to jump directly into this other topic, or I mean, we kind of revert the agenda to talk about BGP first, and to talk about Neutron interconnection. I try to make a better introduction. Sure.
Yeah, go.
Kind of like going.
Continue.
No, but I mean, isn't that what the BGP VPN project is about? Pretty much, right? I mean, if you were to elaborate in a nutshell what the main use case is.
So I can actually go to the drawing because we had made this diagram yesterday to discuss OVN, but it's actually convenient to have it here. So I don't know if everyone can see.
I think you can go to the void sheet there.
No, but he wants to reuse the drawings anyway.
Everyone, others.
Sorry?
No, there are people sitting there, so they cannot see it. So.
Yeah, don't hesitate to move if you want to see it, because I can't move it.
We can paste that
So,
a picture on the other
so
side.
this is the provider network. Like all telcos have this kind of backbone where they connect, they offer access and transit for enterprise customers who want access to the internet, but also want private accesses between their sites on which they can use private addressing, and they don't want to obviously see the traffic from one another. So there's a bunch of terminology. This is a technology that's been around for nearly 20 years. It's been largely deployed since 15 years. So the provider edge device is where the VPN starts. And if you look only at the customer sides, they send just plain IP traffic. And for them, the provider equipment is just a router. And on the provider equipment, you start separating, isolating the traffic from the different customers. And for this, you have two things. You have in the data plane a way to avoid mixing the packets. So it's done with the MPLS technology. BGP VPNs are not tied to MPLS, but historically it's been the only data plane. Now you can use MPLS or GRE. You could also use VXLAN for IPVPN, although it's not implemented much. And that's for the data plane. And to know where to send the traffic and with which data plane identifier, you exchange BGP routes, so BGP VPN routes. BGP is a protocol that's mostly known for internet routing. But when you want to, when this technology was introduced, BGP was extended to allow to carry VPN routes. So instead of saying this prefix is reachable via this router, in these BGP VPN routes, you say that this prefix in the context of this VPN is reachable via this router with this data plane label. So, well, there are lots of tutorials on these BGP MPLS VPNs, that their most common name. But basically, each customer ends up with its own private data space. And all the configuration of the VPNs is done by the operator. Nothing is done for the isolation of customers on customer equipment. So it's, as you see, it's very different from IPsec VPNs because the customer doesn't have any VPN specific setup to do on the devices like it would with an IPsec VPN or with an FSL VPN. So as soon as we introduce cloud data center in the picture, there's an obvious need for having connectivity between VMs in a data center and a certain VPN of a certain customer. You can do it manually with manual configuration on the different routers. You can try to automate this configuration on network devices, but it's a well-known pain point. So the goal with the networking BGP VPN project was to provide an API to all of this to be done on demand. So we have a two-step workflow. The first step is an admin step. The admin creates BGP VPN resources that have all the admin parameters for BGP VPN. I won't go into the detail. All the parameters that only the operator can choose. And these BGP VPN objects, as a second step, are given as read-only object, read-only resources to tenants. And then a tenant can do additional API calls to associate a router or a network to a BGP VPN. And once the association is made, the connectivity will be created between VMs on these networks or behind these routers and the different sites in the network. This was kind of a tutorial for those that don't know BGP VPN. It's also a good introduction to the next topic. So, okay. And I will actually use your question as a transition. Okay. So of course.
So, but may I ask a question now?
Yes.
So, in this environment, in this scenario, how is the IBAN like IP management handled? Is that still in the hands of the admin? I mean, how do you see, for instance, the coordination of IP spaces across various sites?
Yeah, so well, there's no rule. I mean, it's just like in the legacy IP world, you just try to not shoot yourself in the foot.
Okay.
And it can be anything from people talking to one another to an Excel file or a full-blown management system for IP allocations. Very often, customers also outsource the management of the different devices to the provider, which will have tooling to make sure that IP addresses are allocated in a consistent way. Some large customers have their own tooling to manage their private address space and just use this to configure the devices.
But I mean, in a cloud setting, this becomes a lot worse when tenants can bring their own private space. And sometimes, some solutions out there may advocate for the need of a higher level orchestrator that can coordinate the allocation. Right?
Yeah, so the typical way, I think, is to have subnet pools that are created here.
Okay, that's what I wanted
that
to get you
yeah, that are guaranteed to not overlap with one site. And once you have this, you're pretty much done.
But then again, say for instance that you have two sites. So one of the two sites in this scenario is not a Neutron deployment.
Yeah.
So you have to basically define the subnet pool in your cloud deployment not to basically collide with the IP space of the sites, the remote sites that you try to connect to. Okay. Then I guess we can then figure out how we can handle this situation when the two sites are both Neutron deployment, right? Which is the stuff that you want to talk about.
Yes, okay. So this is yet another topic, yes. Okay. Well, the starting point when you have this kind of issue of IP allocation between heterogeneous things is to first have a working connectivity and then look at the issue of IP allocation consistency. Yes, it's also an important step. So if you for instance have another OpenStack data center here, well, if you have a few VMs here and you do the same associations, so of course they have connectivity to the one site for the same VPN, but they will also get private connectivity to the other VMs in the other data center. So as you were saying, Armando, it's the networking BGP VPN service is an easy way to have connectivity between multiple OpenStack connected to the same one, but to the same operator. But it also works if this operator has multiple autonomous systems. If he has trust relationships with other operators, it would still work. So, and this is true because this protocol suite BGP has been thought from day one to work in this federation of autonomous systems. The trouble is that each time you need this kind of connectivity between two sites, you need the admin to have first created a BGP VPN resource. And since this is an admin step, the admin has to allocate an identifier for a BGP VPN. It cannot be on demand if you are just looking at this BGP VPN API as a beginning point. You don't have a full solution to make the interconnection on demand. I'm trying to see what is the best condition to talk about Neutron connection. So let's keep it aside for a moment. The idea that led us to propose the topic of Neutron to Neutron interconnection is that we have tools to create interconnectivity between two sites based on internet routing IPs. We also could use a VPN as a service to have connectivity with private addressing. But well, there are performance implications of using IPsec. So in context where you are where you don't need the encryption, but still want private addressing. We wanted to be able to find a solution for this kind of interconnection to be made on demand. So the use case for the Neutron-Neutron interconnection is when people want private interconnection between multiple data centers, multiple OpenStacks, don't want the overhead of encryption or don't need encryption, and still want this interconnection to be available on demand. So for this use case, we have two sides to the problem. One is what API can we define so that this kind of interconnection can be built by two OpenStack that don't necessarily know, that don't necessarily are under a common orchestrator, because this is something that you don't always have to do, that you don't always want to do or can do. And the second step is how to actually create the connectivity. So creating the connectivity, you can have many technologies to create it. And BTB is, as we just said, one possible way of establishing the connectivity.
So to establish the connectivity, you're saying that you gotta have the connection resources established on either side. Right? It's not like you can. So you gotta create one on one side, create another on the other side, and then establish the connection.
Yeah. So let me jump to the proposition that we're making for Neutron-Neutron interconnection. The idea is to allow a user on one OpenStack to say that a router on this OpenStack has an alias router on a remote OpenStack site. That's the first step in terms of interaction. The second step is to say it is a symmetric thing on the other side, both ways. And
these are neutral routers.
yes, neutral routers. And once the two API calls have been done, actually I should be done this. Can I remove the audience now? So if you have a Lambda user, so one OpenStack and another one. So I'm saying OpenStack, but of course for this network feature, the user will be talking to Neutron, so it's Neutron. So first, say that local router is an alias to a remote router. So local router is a.
And by alias, you mean it needs to peer with a remote router?
I shouldn't know. Let's keep the alias for now, and you will understand what it means afterwards. Let's call it R1 and R2 on the other side. So when this API info is made, Neutron here will actually ask if the other Neutron knows about a mapping between R1 and R2. And at this point, the answer is no. So this is the second step. Then at the third step, the user will associate R2 to R1. R1 being an alias to R2. And well, the Neutron on the other side will ask, do you know about R2 R1? And this time the answer is yes. And with the yes, actually that's kind of an oversimplification, but and with the yes, and after the yes, both OpenStack have a way to exchange the actual parameters to set up the interconnection. So here you have codes that are, depending on the technology that you will use, that will be implemented to actually set up the connectivity. So if the technology that you will use, that you want to use, are BTP VPNs, at this point, what is exchanged is an identifier of BTP VPNs. And here we are leveraging an interesting property of BTP VPNs, which is that the identifier of a BTP VPN are very flexible. You don't have one identifier per VPN. You have a different list of identifiers that you use to. You have to list one that contains the identifier for the route that you export, and one that contains the identifier of the route that you will import. So it's asymmetric, and basically here it's very convenient because it means that locally OpenStack one will allocate one identifier that will be used by the other to import routes, and OS2 will allocate its own identifier that will be used by the other one to import routes, which means that you don't have to globally allocate VPN identifiers. Which again is interesting because it means that you don't need an orchestrator to set up this connectivity. Does it make sense, or
Can I ask you a question now?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Maybe you have one?
Well, I think I wanted to ask whether you had as a prerequisite in this type of scenario like instant federation, so that user has, has visibility into either sides without having to come up with some crazy way to get access from one to the other.
So you don't need federation. You don't need keystroke federation. The only thing that you need is a trust relationship at the networking level between the two operators.
How can the two sides talk to one another to see whether the alias exists?
Yeah. So Neutron needs to have this OpenStack needs to know the credentials for a user on this OpenStack. That sorry?
You don't want to go there.
Let me finish.
Okay.
Not credentials for remote users or something like this. Just the credential for one user that has a role that allows it to read these resources on aliases and write just one field, which is the technical identifier for the BTP.
Well, so one taken, technically you don't need federation, but that's not a good solution.
I mean, you don't need federation, but if you have federation, that's easier.
Well, but I mean, we should push for federation, I think, rather than having to come up with our own mechanism to.
My point is that it's orthogonal to the solution, so that's why I think it's orthogonal. You don't need federation for this to work, so I keep it as an orthogonal topic.
Yeah, I mean, you can keep hundreds of passwords on your text file on your laptop and be able to sign on from one side to another. But having single sign-on is nice. Right? You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Moreover, it starts to get really complex when you more than just 2 peers is good enough.
Yeah.
Once you start to scale out, it's kind of
so
really nightmare.
As soon as you have more than one remote OpenStack, well, by the way, that works between 2 OpenStack, and this works as well for 3 to 5.
Yeah.
So I have
but yes, I mean the point is right that it's storing passwords and so on, and the scalability of the configuration. Yeah.
And then I wonder whether again it would be wise to make the federation a requirement rather than having to both this logic to handle credentials and that type of complexity, whilst the number of sites grow, something that you would want to take care of in the context of the BTP gateway and such. I mean, if you didn't do that, even though it's doable, it's effort and pain that you have to we don't have to deal with. We just assume that the two sites are federated, and the credentials that are provided to Neutron to ask the API whether an array exists or not, it's something that you just take for them.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
I wonder how strongly opinionated you are on accepting federation as a requirement versus not.
I'm not strongly opinionated. If we are not, if the proposal is not tied to it, I would prefer not to make it a requirement. But if there are good reasons to make it a requirement, then fine.
Well, and I guess that's the point for discussion to the wider audiences. If that federation feature, this whole solution becomes a lot more elegant. And so it's a matter of usability. Again, same point that I made before. I can store 100 passwords in a text file on my machine. I can get to where I need to be just fine. Is that a pain in the butt? Yes. But I don't know. That's my feeling. I don't know what other people think.
I need to think about it because the operations that are made across clouds here are not made with the same credentials as the user calls here. These are made with admin rights. You need to be able to.
Yeah, but if admin rights were to be shared across sites, you have to just deal with one.
But you still need the credential for this admin user. I mean, it's not an admin user, right? No. So you're able to create this stuff. I mean, it's a specific role that you don't need to touch specific attributes or specific resources. So it's not a full admin user.
Well, but actually it is, because
so you would still need these credentials to be in some text.
But I guess it needs to be a Neutron admin, because if that R2 router belongs to tenant X and R1 belongs to tenant Y, then when you query, you need to be able to see all the routers on this side.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, it's a valid point. It's a good opportunity to mention that this works without federation, but more precisely, it works across tenants as well.
Right. But I mean, again, one argument would be, as crazy as it may sound, okay, another scenario is that if you don't want to deal with federation, maybe you can have one overarching keystone that is the identity management system across multiple independent sites. You could do that too. I mean, you could put in place some geo replication to synchronize the other stores. And I'd rather deal with that as a fallback option than having to again store credentials of all the sites that I'm dealing with. I don't know. That's my feedback to this discussion so far. And so I had other questions, but something to think about. Yeah.
So I have a slightly different question on a different set of lines. So your goal is to be able to establish connections between left and right side data center, right? So in between, you have multiple providers, which are the domains which you're crossing, and also considering these are two different data centers, the physical resource requirements or the physical resources which are available, which is providing this connectivity, could be significantly different. For instance, your R1 could be behind a 100 gig link versus the R2 is only on 10 gig. So how do you ensure, so somehow you manage to establish where what is, and you created a logical control plane connection. So mine is more from a data plane point of view. That is this going to require through this API to pass more of resource requirements as well? And if the data path crosses multiple providers, say AT&T, Verizon, and DT, right? Three providers are on the way which are managing this.
So the short answer is that the topic you're hinting at is a pretty complex one, but it's actually not specific to this type of traffic. it's actually a problem that we already have with internet traffic. So we don't have a plan in this proposal to address this need specifically for this neutron-neutron interconnection. If I understand,
this is to support the kind of cases service provider.
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said.
This is targeting the kind of VPN services that service providers provide today and making it possible to use cloud. I mean, this multi-provider thing that exists for VPN, that problem.
Can you speak a little louder? Yeah, I get your message.
I can
the issue you raised, that's an intrinsic issue with provider VPNs today. That's not really intrinsic to this application.
Yeah, it's an issue that we already have even when there is no cloud. And
this won't solve that, and it won't make it worse.
Yes, well, these are all internal issues.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
No, but my basic question was that the API which you're defining, so you're sort of emphasizing on the control path, control path, right? So in that control path, you have a requirement to specify the underlying data path as well, in terms of bandwidth, in terms of even though you can identify router 1 and router 2 are available, but they can't establish a physical connection for whatever reason.
So I have to be honest, I have a bad habit of trying to avoid intractable issues. But if somebody wants to address these issues for both OpenStack to OpenStack and OpenStack to the internet, and why not across the internet, then go. I mean, yes, it's not an interesting issue.
I had made a presentation in Barcelona on a very similar subject, and that's where we try to address the very questions which I'm asking. So, and that's why I'm asking. Perhaps the proposal which was presented in Barcelona and what you're looking at it, maybe both need to marry to come up with the.
So I don't know which Barcelona presentation you're.
So there was a presentation made in Barcelona Summit, which was also neutron-to-neutron connection, but that was more addressing from a data point of view. That how do you, if you somehow are able to, see back then we didn't talk about trying to come up with a control plane path. We were talking about how to establish the data plane path. So
yeah, but
when you have a physical resources which don't match the bandwidth requirements, and you're crossing the multiple provider domains, how do you ensure the bandwidth?
Yeah, but don't you solve that using a layered architectural approach? I mean, you have the physical layer, you have the medium access layer, you have the API layer, and so on and so forth, right? So you solve problems on a stepwise. Approach. So I'm not quite sure. So I understand why we would want to worry about what is in the cloud once you solve the problem of connecting to your next hop.
So in this case, it's not a next hop. It's not a next. So in fact, your next hop could fail, even though you know your R1 is here, R2 is here, and in between are 20 hops, right? So
I'm not talking about an IP hop like a hop as a router, like your next stop for the connection to be established successfully.
Yeah. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is, like, if you between R1 and R2, if you have a 15 hops in between, right? So do you have any requirement other than just this being able to discover R1 exists in this data center, R2 exists in this data center? So does this API need to pass anything more? So which is available to intermediate paths to be able to establish?
My answer would be simple. For now, my perspective is to say, no, we don't have such a requirement because we want a solution that doesn't add any more complexity in context where best effort is sufficient or best effort plus over-dimensioning is sufficient. This is largely used everywhere, and we need a solution we need a simple solution that works in the context where people are happy with best effort and over-dimensioning. That's it.
So my understanding is that this solution works if there is some reachability.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so the certain point is I said how to divide it.
Say we have a requirement that you have connectivity, of course, but we are not going. We are not looking at finer grain requirement in terms of how much bandwidth or delay would be guarded.
So perhaps you're assuming that you have the admin or the provider in between, which is establishing the connectivity, and then the user is coming in and orchestrating the whole thing. Is that probably what the
we are assuming that the data centers are initially connected to a common backbone network or a set of backbone networks.
And if that crosses multiple, like, service providers, they are gonna figure out how to agree.
Yeah, then we are back into what we already have today, which works very well on a best effort or best effort plus QoS basis. But today, bandwidth guarantees across autonomous system doesn't really exist. There have been many attempts to do this.
Is it a specific type of connectivity you're asking for, or just IP connectivity? Are you making any kind of assumptions about whether you can carry labels across, or just IP connectivity?
Yes, I didn't get into the details on purpose to not make the thing more complex. But if you have hop-by-hop MPLS connectivity and hop-by-hop redistribution of PTP-VPN routes, it works.
Yeah,
but you also
some of the coordination problems and some of that was talking about.
Yeah, but you also have the ability to actually, if you only have IP connectivity between the data centers, you can use MPLS auxiliary and do the VPN as an overlay over the IP connectivity.
So your base assumption is just IP connectivity. And then
yeah, actually, yeah, you have two possibilities: whether MPLS connectivity, multiple hops across typical backbones that we have today, or MPLS VPNs as an overlay to any IP connectivity. So the former would be closer to what providers do today.
So I mean, to actually match on this question, so what if, for instance, I wanted to VXLAN to connect to the device to the...
Yep. So, well, if you do the connectivity as an overlay over any IP connectivity, it's sufficient to have VXLAN supported as a data plane for IP VPNs. We nearly have such support. We just need to have the right flags, the right tuning knobs to enable it in, for instance, backtype reference driver. So it would be doable.
But then would you be using the same API abstraction that you're thinking of? And
yes,
for instance, use VXLAN or
you would use VXLAN as a data plane for BGP VPNs. So this proposal is only, I mean, it's not even tied to BGP VPNs. You could probably use it with other technology. The complete proposal, implementation proposal that we have relies on BGP VPNs, but it doesn't have to make any assumption on the data plane, except that you need a common data plane between both ends. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. I guess at the point you will end up being in a solution where you able like API abstractions a little bit poorly because we're developing this in the context of the VPN network, when in reality it's not tied to VPN technology, right?
So I'm not making any assumption on where this development needs to happen.
Okay.
We could do it by comfort in networking BGP VPN, but if we really want to have the thing not be tied too much to BGP VPNs, we can certainly do it in a separate project.
Okay. Well, again, if we just think about the data abstraction, the data abstraction would be working within the Neutron community. The definition would be available to anyone to implement it. So that one open implementation will be based on BGP VPN technologies. One other implementation would be based on L2 gateways, right? And so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So long as we don't capture only specific data plane abstractions in the API, then that problem is solved.
Yes.
Right? But we gotta be careful that we don't leak those abstractions in the API. That's the other the feedback that I
Yeah,
can give you.
it's perfectly consistent with the proposal, which even if you look at one implementation option, which is BGP VPNs, even in this case, we're not even looking at the data plane. We're only looking at the content. But you're completely correct that it would be, the goal would be to make a generic proposal that would be implementable with layer 2 gateways or VXLAN stitching or
In the case
even
of the
VLAN
BGP,
stitching if
yeah,
somebody wants.
in the case of the BGP VPN, what would you achieve?
Root targets. Each OpenStack would specify to the other OpenStack which root target to use as a root target to import the route from the other side. So something that I didn't mention, which is quite important, and it actually relates to what we were just saying. It's a solution that doesn't require implementation in backend. As soon as you have assuming that we implement first the solution based on BGP VPNs, it will work from day one with any solution, with any backend, any SDN controller that has a driver for BGP VPNs. Is it obscure or?
A little bit.
So this is a new service.
It's almost like you said, this is magic. But that's how I read it.
It's actually service composition. It's a new service that actually reuses another service to as its implementation. And the other service is networking BGP.
Okay, but there is still, you gotta hook up the API, the new API calls into the new service.
No, actually, the implementation for this service would rely on calls to the existing BGP VPN API.
Right, but so for instance, you say, so long as R1 and R2 have been hooked up with their BGP VPNs being created by the admin, once you've discovered and established the areas, things work. That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, assuming we implement this for BGP VPNs, we don't have to ask Open Daylight folks to write a driver. They already have a driver for BGP VPN. Right. Yeah. That's my only point. It's really service composition. We don't need a driver for each SDN controller or reference implementation.
So if I were to look at this and try and map these on top of Neutron components, this would be like potentially yet another service plugin that ends up depending on potentially to the BGP VPN service plugin. Yeah, it does some orchestration effect.
Yeah. So the example I've presented is with an aliasing between routers to create IP connectivity between data centers, between two OpenStack routers on different OpenStack clouds. We would have the same thing at layer 2 by aliasing between networks. So as long as you are able to have consistent allocation of IP addresses, you would use the same proposal to do connectivity inside one layer 2 domain.
But then when you specify networks, you gotta have to walk through how do you end up finding the parameters that allow you to establish the connection. Like in this case, the routers are the entities associated to their, the BGP counterpart, right?
Yes. So the BGP API has the ability to do associations for networks as well.
Okay.
So we would leverage this type of association. But that's so we've had a prototype working based on the work of an intern last year. So it was made on a variant of this proposal. So we have quite a lot of things to. This is still something that remains to be written. perhaps not from scratch because we've had some experience in exploring how this can be implemented. But we'd be happy to have more feedback, and if people want to dig more in this direction, then we are available. Well, we being me.
So is there a spec?
Sorry?
Is there a specification?
No.
No?
It's and I still need to write the slides for CNET, so we have a 10-minute slide there. But I can write the spec. Yes.
Okay.
It needs to be captured somewhere at some point. So yes.
Okay.
Well, we are 1 minute to the top of the hour.
Yeah. So thanks for listening. I hope it was for the first time.
I think how to manage your credential, you said, is a key point, and it might be able to use Keystone Trust or something. I'm not sure the current status of the Keystone Trust.
I don't know Keystone Trust, but I look it up then.
So it is better to share the credential direct with the trust is more suggested way, I think.
Yes.
Thank you, Thomas. So let's take a 5 minutes break. And
Even then.
what? What? Okay. Just for a man.
I like this. I like this.
I know that too.
10 minutes.
It's very hard to do that.
I like this. This is interesting.
I found that one swan.
Yeah,
I also noticed another button.
¿Por qué rellenó la
encuesta? Consistency, conflict. And I saw this other. You have to have circle and paste. Yes, the lines in YouTube way.
The address doesn't exist.
The Neutron.
I don't know when it's still decentralized.
To control the address space.
So we call
three drive.
the address doesn't exist, so it generates a
Yeah, well,
downside with us in the present.
yes. Yeah, the thing is that
I'm thinking the
I don't know why.
Yeah,
The idea was to avoid having to rely on syntax. You can add a syntax system if you want to ensure interpretation. I understand your proposal. Yeah, didn't want to do a reason.
So we can't just
It seems to be the contract, because that was a huge problem. It's easy. You should already have to just, there and shut the system. Well, this business is really have consistency, coordination.
Yeah.
So,
That would be yet another.
yeah, I wouldn't say
Yeah, well, I'll still be around.
No, I was thinking that
Maybe he secretly is still trying to take down those.
I don't know. He's going to become part of that.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss it. Yeah, but yeah, I'll still be around on league wires and connected and that kind of stuff. So I'll still be around. Yeah. Things. 26. Coming up.
Would you talk to someone else, or would you do that? Guys?
No,
We should probably meet given that we are in the same area.
Yeah, we can always meet for coffee. I'm not sure yet. So I have the option now, and it's a lot cheaper if I do. So probably not Minnesota. I might move to Austin because there's some people on the team that are in Austin IBM. I don't know if I'm gonna like what exactly. So to have an office a little cheaper, might be my option.
yeah, I'm not sure.
Cheaper and no state income.
But yes, I don't think we're at the point where
under the hood, if it's, can't someone do that anyways, could someone
Could cross.
Right.
Some people seems to be like
So yeah, this one, I know it's pretty test period. It was the link you sent me. Yeah, I was just looking through here and I'm like, oh, that's weird. Yeah, subnote too. Yeah. You know, it's probably, you probably shouldn't have like the addresses there. So it's trying to clean something up that doesn't exist. So maybe it is a migration thing. So I don't know. But we're seeing the address go away.
Yeah.
model this on PTG. Next slide is on the side, he has an use space. This assuming the DVR is map, so for the table mode goes to the it's not all goes to it's not sometimes close that code because the DVR is not oh, so this is that IP address that's kind of broken. So the way we can show you worry about trying to fix that. I mean, like, I'm not saying I don't need to fix it. I can paper it over because of the catching it. But if it is available on this one, why not we are getting that information? Right, that's what I think that process for the addresses. So it has the list as you have. I guess I must have the access, or it thinks it used to have the access. It wasn't configured as my IP, it was configured right as a router. And those were two, and so then try to keep the IP. So first, yes. So if you want to deploy it to test it, test it just between nodes. If you want to actually build a setup where you exchange MPLS with the
I don't have to lose the W which it's fine. Anything bad that we should be worried about? Like the stock market crash or whatever? I'm actually so pleased that the dollar has lost like 20% against the euro since the years. I mean, I've been watching it because I wanted to give some money to Manchester, and I didn't have it back then. Okay, I'm gonna have to wait for HP to like send us some pizza and then some stuff come off and then I land in mine.
And the thing is going down.
It's been going down ever since. So if I want to give, I mean, neither I take a loss. But I don't want to take the loss, of course, because it's like 20%. I mean, in the end, it's not a huge amount of money. It kind of annoys me.
Yep. It worked the other way around.
Right, yeah, because of the business.
Yeah. What happened is that February, March was the peak.
Yeah.
And then the prices will recover. And she got married in March.
So when it was perfect.
Yeah.
No, I was always out of luck. Every time, like I had maybe a British pound, I had euros, I always got late to me. All the time. I always ended up exchanging money when the exchange rate was the least favorable for me. Wherever I was, which side. Always. Anyhow. Sure.
I was about to ask it as an argument.
Yeah, actually, it's been going nice.
We can try teaming between
We need to have this conversation about that.
I don't know how much you can say about that, though. I mean,
this is exactly
what I'm trying to say is that we need to identify potential people approach them and see if we can take them to support them. I mean, to give them a camp. I
oh, yeah.
Earlier today because I wrote for
and fix that.
I would support with your management. I think that's a kind of thing. And then if we have the agreement of your management, start working with them, build up the number. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta be careful whether
how the free.
I think the balance, the tough balance
I think
is between
I haven't tried recently
the
PTG implementation in Python.
the
But I
quality
think
of
the
the
one
views
is fast.
from
So
one
free
person
routing
to
is
the
good.
other.
So if you use free
Because
routing,
even though
you can have
people can commit time and energy and resources, some
and if
you gotta make sure that the
with the
file
same,
is somewhat consistent
target.
from one view to
Correct.
the other, right?
Correct.
Same target, then you will have connectivity.
Correct.
We don't
There's a danger in that. I see what you're saying.
you don't stress out that, but that is
So
important
in
to
on my laptop,
preserve that bar. And I mean, what happens? What is the worst that can happen? That you have like components at different level of working maturity, different level of stability, and blah blah blah.
So they have a software.
It's not a great, it's not that it's a catastrophic scenario to be in, but
On my laptop.
it's something that I would strive for avoiding.
Yeah, I agree. Fair point. Good point.
It's for people who don't have the. Or actually, you can also use you can also use background digital. You can also use.
Where are you getting this time?
Downstairs.
All the way down.
There's still more?
Just to have a
Plenty more?
Yeah, there's jars and candy.
Why didn't you go get some? But Mark, Candice.
Yeah, there are big candy bars. Yeah, that's candy bars.
Should I go and check it out? Would you allow me to go downstairs?
No. Let's discuss.
I want to drink. Is that just Red Bull? So there is
Oh, right outside the.
There's a Pepsi.
I think he's asking where the Red Bull is.
Yeah.
The Red Bull is right where the Red Bull was.
So let's give Armando a few minutes.
Yeah. Come on, use the JSON code or
So you have a Red Hat branded and Google.
Yeah, you may. They just pay for Google Apps.
Some types of offers.
So have the Google Drive, calendar, and
Salesforce on.
everything in one place.
Yeah.
Maybe for
It's just figuring out why. Who are special authentic IP networks.
When did you switch to Gmail?
It's not as. No.
I think, yeah, 1 year ago or something like that. Yeah, currently at the start it wasn't mandatory for everyone, but eventually it became mandatory.
So what did you have before?
Simbra.
Oh, okay. I know what that is.
Yeah.
So what time are you leaving from here, from the hotel tomorrow?
I'm probably not until like 5 or something, because I think it's a 8 o'clock flight. Yeah, it's coming simple JSON encoder. Type error for JSON file. Yeah, JSON file. But I did find there's a handy custom renderer saying I can pass and give it the Oslo JSON.
Yeah, now we have to run it. What I'm going to find out those are this time. This has got to change. The last time I did this, the import inside JSON. Yes. Changed.
Yeah. So is that a dependency if it's not expressed?
No, it is. It didn't set up that high. But what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to try to import JSON from the brand simple JSON.
but in the code,
it's just a lyrics. So you don't like we are just related on
the code itself.
You don't like the idea for using configure for free testing
Right.
across repos. You think it's a bad idea?
I see. No, I just want to see where you want.
I'll harass.
Well,
It's not
either way,
gonna
I need to make it consistent with the old one. And with JSON itself.
Go to Neutron.
You on the review itself.
That message configure. Yes. To the colors.
Oh, I see.
I'm under the thing.
Yeah, I'm on the review. Okay, I'll process it. I'll let you know.
Okay. Because I found it that I just copy paste.
Oh, I know.
Script and
Because the thing is that then we have to introduce a code issue.
What we could do is like determine what you actually need from the moving to the library. That's our best library. So that we at least know there's something that it could be used.
actually
Because
it's what
it's basically referred to.
If you want to go away from
But something else.
Oh, I see.
And it's a constant using split first, it's fine.
So the trigger for doing this is that
Not so much.
it's our full stack test job. We had been it was started with sudo like Neutron before, and since we lose kind of a feature that DevStack gate VM provides. DevStack gate it provides a few.
Yeah, I already found it there.
We want to use it just like everything has been
Using a different
like
JSON render
and
and it pupils
same motivations.
authentic IP network,
Except that this only works if we have a proper bootstrap set. So it's actually the
which
bootstrap
comes back from the metering plugin.
Yeah, that is
I just Slovenian provides $50.
Yeah, so they have a free time, it's there in time.
If you want to stay connected all the time and so on, keep everything for you. But you can mix it.
So the change is there.
Okay, that makes sense.
Are you on IR? So finish it.
I am.
No, you can, I mean, the base ID works.
Okay.
The way
Sure, no problem.
Because
That's
has like
applications
it's a straight communication, but it's not.
So I mean, every time we add a namespace, we just have to wait until we see it. Do a loop.
And also when you check whether it's there.
Nice.
Because the next call
I'm taking it, so check it out.
and it's not checkpoints are like 5 times.
Well, wait, why do we have to check if for places where we check if it exists? Why do we have to do that all the time?
So in this case, it's full stack following two pieces one by one. One is for namespace, another one is for all its work. And the second one, sure, the namespace is there before any work.
I see. But if the first one doesn't return until it's actually created, wouldn't that solve it?
That is also full stack case, but in theory you could have something that uses the library. And
I mean, just in our library where we add the namespace, don't let that return until it shows up to OS.
yeah, we can do that. If one solves like Git in general, you may have some two pieces of code that run at the same time and do something inside the namespace, so they both ensure namespace and stuff. We would also then need to catch any errors from attempting to create
And see if it was already created.
because again, I feel something else. Maybe we should try our own library for mapping so that we can substitute that or extend ourselves.
Yeah. Again.
So should we start? So the last topic we have in the agenda is for today is how do we avoid losing neutron cores and how we can create new ones, right?
Oh, you're worried losing Neutron PTLs.
That's to be hard to focus on.
I tried to fix that, but it didn't work. My fix didn't work. Right?
Now, why is it hard enough? You're not quite hard enough.
Yeah. My bad.
Yeah. Well, you try.
Yeah.
So what I've been thinking, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, what we need to do is to identify in the community people who are contributing, who are doing reviews, talk to them, see if we have support from their management for them to become cores, and then start working with them to mentor them, probably assign some mentor to them and help them to increase their review counts, and go from there.
So what is the absolute minimum requirement?
Or what?
Like in terms of the count, yeah. What would be acceptable?
No, previously it's been quite a few reviews, but that seems to have led to the problem we have now where we don't have anybody that can do enough reviews to become.
But I mean, to me, it's not a matter of count. At this point, it's a matter of quality reviews. Good, fewer quality reviews are much better than hundreds of shitty reviews.
Yeah.
That's what they say plainly.
Yeah.
That we've seen examples of like that in the past. And they kind of defeat the point of having a core, to be a core.
Yeah. So.
Talking about me?
Yeah.
That is it saying to my face.
Wait.
Okay.
So that's my proposal. What do you think? I mean, what else we can do?
You mentioned mentors. Something more formal.
Yeah, try to formalize. I mean, I can share my experience. My experience was that I worked very closely for some time with Carl Baldwin. He helped me a lot. It wasn't ever formalized. It was more like a arrangement that happened naturally. But I think that one thing that we should do is to formalize more there.
That's a good thing. But how would you do that? In your case, you just happen to be coincident. But if you, as a project leader, if you were to develop something like that, what would be the best way to go about it? Make it more available to more people.
So as I said before, we need to identify the people. We need to and probably ask them to step up.
I remember when I started. People who step down from Kura don't get to talk.
Go ahead.
I remember when I started with Neutron, and for a long time, doing reviews was hard because it's a big project. It's complicated, and something that helped me a lot is having by people really experienced in the project, to have like deep dive sessions that are going to guide you through the design and the structure of the code and how everything works. Because sometimes as a reviewer that it's starting, you don't have enough knowledge of the architecture or how things are supposed to work. Eventually, you're gonna get in it if you keep doing reviews. But in my experience, it's much more faster if you have the people who has the knowledge teaching you. So
I think that's an excellent point. And perhaps I wish you would have had this session in the early part of this PT. We could have probably arranged maybe an hour or two during this PTG to do precisely that.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be done locally. Like maybe a video conference with interested people signing up to listen, make answers, make questions, and the people with experience who is willing to spend some time preparing the sessions. And it's really helpful in my experience. It's
we can building on that, we can even create a series of these sessions.
Yeah, you can put them on YouTube.
Different reviewers have experience on different
topics. No.
You know, sometimes it's not just about the code itself. I mean, the system that you're looking at. I mean, code reviews, if a usable code review may be one that may not necessarily come from a person who's experienced with the system, but is an experienced software engineer. So, I mean, code reviews
but there are many variables.
Right, but maybe ones that, you know, are able to spot like particular smells when it comes to, like, again, leaky abstractions, you know, poorly decoupled testing, and
you can cover those topics also.
But you can cover those topics, maybe like, I don't know, identifying a good few books that one can read and learn that way.
Yeah.
With that approach, you don't put the strain on an already stretched like core or mentor who's like kind of like juggling with that many.
No, I totally understand that. But
I'm not saying that that's not a good idea, but we gotta balance that. I mean, and to me, it's almost as effective, not more effective, to get that person become a better software engineer than become a better Neutron developer. Because that kind of like
there are variables in the same equation.
You also mentioned architecture. Shouldn't documentation already cover that, so you don't need to have a personal relationship with someone explaining? If we miss that, then
documentation helps, but having somebody to who you can ask, or who is, I don't know. Documentation also helps.
Usually, like,
there are different ways of transmitting the same information.
When you onboard someone, you first show him like a list of links, videos, the initial steps, and then if there are issues, questions, let's talk about some specific.
From my experience, reading code that trace some behavior on a specific area is really helped me understanding that when I join the community. So the documentation helps a specific area for the some complicated documentation helps us to understand the specific topic which is complicated, but at some time we need to code from the beginning to the end in the specific, for example, agent or API area or so the OBS something. So I think it helps to understand the code base. I think.
Yeah, so maybe the answer is all of the above, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's all of the above. So we need to tackle this from different fronts.
Yeah.
Different point of view. So one is the mentoring, the technical mentoring. One is the software engineering, knowledge transfer and knowledge acquisition. Another thing is what is documentation, as Miguel says.
My point is really similar to Miguel. To Miguel.
To this Miguel.
It's highly available.
To cancel Miguel.
So as you said, is identify people who are interested in, SOAK that be the recipient of all this information transfer. And for that, I mean, this venue is a great opportunity to have that face-to-face talk with various individuals who may have interest in, or have the opportunity to commit at least for the cycle, the existing cycle, probably the next to the project. Not the low ones. You want to be down in code?
I don't have the cycles. I don't have the cycles.
You don't know the cycles?
I don't have the cycles.
I don't have the cycles. Now, too bad.
But it's a honest answer that yeah, I mean, if you can, but if you can.
I mean, I guess the past year or so I've thought that we have to think to some degree short term, right? So let's think about queens, and then we worry about what comes after that. So I mean, yeah, it doesn't need to be a long-term commitment,
Right.
But it's nonetheless an opportunity that can enrich yourself for many years to come.
Another thing
Some may be less, less efficient opportunity than others. That's it.
Another thing that people often mention is projects having a list of low-hanging fruits, things that you could start with. I don't know whether we have a huge list of actual low-hanging fruits in Launchpad or not. Maybe worth to check and making sure that it's populated. If we come up with something simple, then not fix it immediately, but put it there.
Yep. Again, as I said, all of the above. Yeah, good idea. Yeah.
Well, it's already there. It's not any idea. Maybe we don't use it that much.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many are open bugs or low hanging fruit take.
Just a note for the, it was a time when I checked the low hanging fruits, but those were really not good. So there were some things which were in that special corner of Launchpad for years, and nobody wanted to touch them. So perhaps it's another way to check regularly those bugs which should be easily solved by somebody who just came from the street.
I think that looking from the contribution standpoint is a valid one, but I think potentially a more effective one would be starting from the review side, because when you review and you review and shadow other co-reviewers, first of all you end up learning what other reviewers complain about, or end up looking for smells in the code that's being contributed. But by reviewing, you may identify what problems that the code surrounding the contribution has, or what problems that code may be introducing. And typically we say, okay, we can work on that, and then we can follow up. And that's how you end up raising your level of contributions. You don't have to end up looking at Launchpad and bugs. You can look at code that's actually being contributed to start contributing yourself. I did that all the time in Kevin. I mean, this code is terrible. So people contribute the code. I'll come after him and clean up the ground. And that usually works really well.
Carl did the same for me.
But then, if you review, you end up seeing areas of code that may deserve some love or some improvement, some refactoring.
Yeah.
And that's how you kind of get warmed up in the project. Maybe getting through Launchpad and the Launchpad low-hanging fruit bugs, it's too much of a cold start. if you try another strategy and go that way, you may end up warming up throughout the process.
Yeah,
And may have a higher chance.
Yeah, and the other thing to add to that comment is that forcing yourself to look at the code, even if you don't completely understand what's going on, is going to improve your skills. And trying to go through the entire patch set, even if in the beginning you say, "Oh my God, I don't even know what this guy is talking about." I mean, it really helps. Yeah.
Well, those are good suggestions for people who may want to try and be more active, but what we can do. It doesn't tell us what we can do.
So there's something that maybe would help as well. So there's something that we see in a few stadium projects where I myself as an example, but there are many others, where we have people that start to contribute to Neutron via a stadium project. And if in the stadium project you have reviews on your code by experienced developers, it's a very good opportunity to be taught a few interesting things. So having experienced developers review the code in the stadium project would also help improve the skills of new developers of the whole Neutron community.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, and it's something that the existing code reviewers should take into account. For instance, I tend to do that when I look at the backports. Like I scan the backport and see how the patch goes and see whether there are potential issues that way. I haven't done as much this cycle as I did in the past, but that's one way in which the code reviewer of the Neutron code project can end up interfacing himself or herself with the project, because that's where the stable backports are in charge of the Neutron listing in charge of that.
That helps, but it's a minor fraction of the overall code.
Sure.
Because today we see a certain separation between Stadium project and Neutron core still, and I think that it's true at least for some of the Stadium projects. They are a little bit on their own to implement their drivers, for instance, and they're sometimes shy to push evolutions in Neutron that they would depend on. So they do their own hack, and then perhaps a few cycles afterwards it gets cleaned up by being pushed into Neutron, but it gives me the feeling that it could be more efficient if there was more implication, well, joint implication.
I mean, you're right, but I mean, there is really no magic solution to this problem. I mean, if not, for instance, opportunities like this one for people to establish a social, relationship that can be taken home, on IRC or Gerrit or the mailing list or whatever, and so that people find more easily find it easier to reach out for help, because you can't really help, as said, if a person is shy and decides to go down its own, down the road on his own without seeking help, and then they end up painting themselves in the corner. I mean, you may end up being laggy, and someone may catch you in the act and say, "Okay, what you're doing, you should do it this way," or you may be not like that laggy and end up, painting yourself in the corner. And what I'm trying to say here is that, yeah, we should try and be as welcoming as we can as a group.
Why don't we just bring all the service plugins back into the Neutron info?
And all
the drivers too.
I wouldn't even my haven't
Yeah, sure.
That's a bad joke. I don't think that would solve it. because if you ignore code of the tree, you ignore code in tree as well. And that will make things worse because code will move on. That's my serious answer to your joke. You know,
Hey,
Well,
that
the
was not a
viewers
joke,
would
that
have
was
to
a
review it,
serious, that was a serious proposal, I think, by the PPL. PPL don't make jokes. They make serious proposals.
but yeah,
Yeah, but XPTL develop jokes.
so
Yeah, I was not expecting two black picture. I mean, actually, as a contributor to Stadium Good, I learned a lot, and I think it's overall it works really. It doesn't work that I mean, but more joint application of Stadium developers into Neutron and vice versa would certainly
yeah,
help
but see,
grow the overall level of skills of new contributors.
I mean, I'm personally the kind of person that if I'm not familiar with some specific area that I'm looking at, I'm not worried to reach out for help and reach out to a person who I know is a subject matter expert on that particular area and seek for advice. There shouldn't be nothing wrong with that. And ultimately, that's down to the individual. I mean, if the individual doesn't feel like comfortable in doing that, there's nothing you can do to change that.
Yeah, but sometimes sometimes you end up in need for help, but you just would probably benefit from an external look.
Yeah,
and that's
something that
that's a situation where you're not sure that it's worth taking time from people.
Yeah, but again, actually, one thing is, I've been a reviewer to a patch like on an individual basis. May end up like triggering an interest from that reviewer and start the conversation. I mean, many times I touch a piece of code and I end up pulling the people who I believe subject matter experts on their code and seek help. And adding a reviewer on Reddit, not like having everyone on a patch, right? Adding a single contributor to it. Yeah, it's something that is maybe just enough to get the conversation started, and that could be that end up becoming like a snowballing effect. Right? You don't have to maybe wait for the person to show up on IRC, or stalk the person up to his house when he's going to walk his dog and things like that. So that could help, and I would recommend that.
I have a question. So, which field is this? Which field is missing for query? Because like API, DB, or AGM, or there is some fields. And Neutron query can have some specific field. In my understanding.
Oh, you mean which area of expertise?
Yeah.
Well, there is a table where we've captured, list of what we call them lieutenant per areas. I'm not up to date with the latest snapshots, but
it's in the tree.
Yeah, maybe you can add a link to the other part, but that's a good point. So we've broken down the code base in areas, in functional areas, so like testing, L3, L2, and so on and so forth. That list was pretty much very full stuff. And over time, we had people move on. So I'm sure that there are gaps now. I just don't remember which.
So let's say that we update the lieutenants table, and I'm going to post the.
Yeah, the biggest question though is which one needs people most?
Yeah.
Which
Yes.
area? People interested in helping.
I mean, for people who have been in the community for a while, they know each other very well. They know who is who's starting to not have enough cycles on Neutron. But from the outside of the core, it's not that obvious who is reducing his involvement. So, no. It's not things that are easily captured or written down, but.
So my question is that I want to know that what field needs some help in the
we'll figure it out. And as Miguel is going to do, he's going to add link to the Etherpad. We're going to look at it, and potentially we're going to bring this as a topic for the next Neutron meeting.
Yeah, we can actually
You can talk about this.
we can actually add to that table for the next Neutron meeting and do an assessment as to where we need more help. What?
Good idea.
Thanks, Miguel. So I'm challenged in clean cycle with some development and some maybe.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll take you up and I'll ping you. Okay.
All right, guys. It was great meeting you all. And enjoy the night. Drink for me as well.
Bye.
Anything else?
Should we talk about bug management? We had an issue kind of
Yeah,
with the cycle
yeah.
of like getting people, getting
Volunteers.
deputies, bug deputies. Yeah. Should we change it? Not do bug deputies anymore, and just kind of say everybody keep looking at bugs and subscribe to the bug list?
Or do a rotation, 6 rotation. That's an alternative.
That's the bug deputy, isn't it? The rotation was.
No, but what I
Without volunteers.
without volunteers.
Yeah, we need to find someone.
And well, the course and the, I'm gonna say the extended team, not only course.
That's right. Yeah, I know.
So I'm inclined to say, no, let's go and do a fixed rotation.
The other thing that might help too, I wanted to do, I never got around to, is maybe have, whenever a bug's reported, a message go into the IRC channel too. I don't know if you can ask him for people if there's already a project that does that. Might help.
So let's do something. Let's add another action item there for me for the next Neutron meeting to make a proposal of that rotation.
Okay.
Regarding bug, or some stadium projects shares a Neutron launch pad now, and some projects have their individual one. Do we keep Neutron launch pad for as a Neutron firewall to the, or do we need a specific dedicated launch pad? Or
Yeah.
It sometimes make bug management difficult to some projects to get into the stadium and push out to the stadium. Yeah. But now we are receiving another service bug in Neutron launchpad or something. So this is another topic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
but,
have to think about that.
Having different launch
But my point is, if we have a separate launch pad, for example, a firewall team easily look for and maintain their bug list easily. So that it is not easy to scan hundreds of bug lists for each project.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Well,
So going back to that idea of sending a message to the channel, is that what's the next step there?
I think you have to talk to maybe somebody in Infra and see if there's another project that already does it, and then if they have an IRC bot that watches Launchpad events.
Will you do that, or you want me to follow up?
I think you should probably follow up.
Okay. Oh, all right.
Yeah, it's not a big deal. It's just sometimes having a reminder
Yeah.
go right into the channel. It's easier to pay attention to.
Cool. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I think we're done for the day. And for those of you coming to tonight's dinner, remember 7:30.
Sorry. Okay.
7:30.
And the reservation is under my name.
Yeah, the high availability doesn't work this on
but this is true. Every time somebody says to me something like, Miguel did this, and they clarify, no, but not you, the other Miguel was, I always respond, the hands for Miguel.
yeah, the handsome one. Have you looked at the storyboard thing?
Oh yeah, storyboard. We have to wait until they want us to wait until all the project.
The smaller project.
Because there's no way to do like cross-project bugs easily between storyboard and Launchpad.
Oh.
So they're starting out projects that are pretty isolated first on storyboard, and then once they're kind of comfortable with everything being ready, then they'll move Nova and Neutron and all the kind of closely interrelated projects at the same time to storyboard.
Makes sense.
No, it's
Trying to get some accessible. There's also always that code just poke them. Yeah. The horrific extension manager instance. Yeah. Factory. Yeah, right then full backwards compatibility.
That's that we should. I already submitted a change to Ryan. There's a couple days.
Oh, right.
He's got another thing to do that Friday. So it's like, the problem is,
Yes, started with the love and reaching that.